So the landscape for 14 to 19 provision is really changing quite fast at the moment, and quite a lot of different things happening. From your point of view, where you sit, what do you see as the most important changes that are occurring?
Well, it's very difficult to say, to be honest. I mean, I think there are so many changes, as you say. I wouldn't isolate any one particular one as being important. There are many that concern me, if I'm honest. I think the proliferation of a whole range of different types of organisation to serve a similar age group it just feels very muddled. It feels a bit confusing for young people. So faced with the offer of a university technical college, a free school, a studio school, an academy sixth form, a school sixth form, a sixth form college, a general FE college, an apprenticeship, and maybe something like opt-in. That's 9 different pathways, and you have to say, how are they all going to be different? How are they going to be distinctive? And how will young people know? Because the connection service is no longer there and careers advice is in the hands of schools. And that's a big challenge for schools. They haven't got a lot of additional resource to do that. And also that these options are changing and shifting so much that I think it becomes far more complex for young people and their parents to navigate. And you can imagine, if we're talking about the young people who we're focused on with the Opt-in Plus project, they're precisely the young people who don't have that support at home, who don't have people who've had at least experience of using one or two of those routes, and maybe not even knowing where to go to start to find out about it. It makes that transition even more difficult for them. And I guess what I'm seeing at the moment is, with all of those kind of new developments and new entities, they're all, in essence, talking about the kind of bright young people who are likely to be the ones who will have their 5 A stars to C at GCSE. And that's the kind of 60%, 65%. And I'm concerned about the 35%, and all of these new developments, new initiatives don't really seem to be penetrating that group.
So you're on record as being particularly concerned about that group of young people that don't really reach the level that's required to move on to level 3 or to A-level standard and so on. What is it about the current changes and things that you think there's a risk that group might be neglected, and what would you like to see done about that?
Yes, I mean, and another big factor in a risk for that group is the removal of EMA, because, like it or not, performance and poverty actually do have a close relationship. And we've found that there's a reduced number of young people who are opting to come to us at courses at level 2 and below because they no longer have that wherewithal through EMA to be able to pay for their travel and so on. We do have a bursary scheme, but that is much less generous, and therefore we can only give less to each individual. Apart from a few who are in a very sort of high need category. We're really pleased that's there, absolutely, I wouldn't want to lose that. But it's quite interesting to see how the removal of one key part of the jigsaw then really changes the whole picture. So that's an area as well which I think we will need to continue to focus on. In this college, we've set up our own student opportunity fund, and we're looking at various forms of fundraising and involvement of alumni to try and hopefully develop that into something so that we can do more to help young people. But one of the things really is that colleges like this, FE colleges and training providers, have a good track record at working with the level 2 and below. But they're not the parts of the system that are really being encouraged to expand through the changes to funding or the changes to structures. And that, as I say, that's the bit that worries me, really.
So in the changes that we're talking about, do you see opportunities there as well?
I think there are. To be honest, though, it's difficult to really articulate what they are. I know that there has been a lot said about freedoms and flexibilities and so on for the sector. I think a lot of those things were already there. And I think some of it is about finding new ways of working and different ways of working. And we still, I don't think, have really settled on what they are. We know that working in partnership is much more critical. particularly in a time when there's less resource. So it's partnering up with people who've got complementary skills, complementary resources, but also finding those common goals and common aims. So working across, for example, different parts of the public sector. The more I talk to people, the more I can see how our aims and intentions can be aligned. Health with education, housing with education. And so I think probably that's where the freedoms and flexibilities will help us more than any kind of, particular programme or policy. It's freeing us up to work differently.
So what you're arguing for there then is a more local approach of different organisations, education, health, housing and so on, really trying to work together.
Yes, and particularly to understand the nuances of localities and communities within those localities. As I said, as an organisation we work with very different communities, and we need to be able to tailor the offer that we have to those different groups of people or learners or households, but also to link in with the employers and look at the opportunities that are there. And one of the things, interestingly, that kind of pulls all this together is the more that organisations like colleges and training providers can help employers to improve their skills base, help their productivity, help them to grow, that creates more opportunities. It builds opportunities for a community, and then it builds a sense of community with more spending power, which then enables other businesses to flourish. And you can absolutely see that cycle. And I think in the areas and the communities we work with, everyone is now pointing in that same direction and understanding the importance of focusing on that. And that's really only happened in the last sort of 5 years. But I guess that's what comes out of being in a recession, and in a very deep recession. People do have to start thinking differently. So actually that's a kind of positive that does come out of all this, really.
Looking forward a little bit, we're beginning to get towards the end of the current ESF programme. It finishes at the end of next year. We're beginning to think now about what the new programme might look like, and there's a lot of discussion, debate about what the priorities might be. From where you're sitting, from your point of view, how would you like to see ESF resources being used in the future? What's the most positive use for that sort of fund?
I think if we're looking to build on some of the learning from programmes like Opt-in Plus, one of the things, as I've mentioned a couple of times, is the transition coordinator role. And I'm quite interested in how that might work for an employer or for a group of employers, and how it might enable them to get the most from new entrants to their companies. And whether there is something in that links very much to what I was just saying about local economic growth, local partnerships, and really maximising that local source of labour. And so in the way that transition coordinators have been really successful in helping young people move into more structured learning, I'm wondering whether there's an opportunity to do that, into moving more into employment for a wider range of people. So that's kind of one thought, and possibly even the notion of some kind of golden hello or start-up grant that helps people when they're first in a job. Because even things like having the right clothes and having your hair cut and everything else, all of those things cost money. And if these families or young people or adults don't have access to that, it's really difficult to start your first job or restart a job without that sense of I'm here and I'm ready for this. So that's kind of a couple of areas that we have talked about in college as being that could be really useful. Another area is around setting up sort of intermediate companies, which I think could operate between educational organisations and the commercial sector. And companies which operate on business lines, that are probably social enterprises, but that actually could give people guaranteed employment for the first year or 2 years of their working life. And then they're much more ready to move into the labour market proper, if you like, and kind of hitting the ground running almost. But it's actually working out what those intermediate companies might look like and how they might work. But I think investing European social funding in something like that could be really quite powerful. because eventually they could be self-sustaining, or they should be if they're run as proper companies. But to always be, not for profit, and to keep ploughing any profits back into the company itself. So, they're just a few thoughts, but I'm sure there's lots of other people out there who've got many other ideas. And of course, once we see some of the specifications coming out, we'll be talking to our local partners, employers, other providers, and the local authorities, public sector, to see really whether there's anything that we can do together that will have that real sort of local geographical impact.
Melanie, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much.